magic school bus.
Make a plankton too.
Take that! On our magic school bus.
Drop the river of lava.
On magic school bus.
Such a fine thing to do. So strap.
Today I want to talk to you about a prominent issue in our community, occupational licensing for school bus drivers. Before we begin, let's learn the basics about occupational licensing. You might be wondering what an occupational license is. An occupational license is a license for specific requirements to be able to practice a certain occupation in certain states. There are many different types of licenses, such as medical licenses and EMT licenses and licenses for engineers. Most of these licenses are decided on a state-by-state basis and requirements and regulations. Some licenses are more stringent than others. Inconsistencies between states cause problems for many American workers. Now that you know the basics of occupational licensing, let's discuss occupational licensing for school bus drivers in Kansas. In Kansas, drivers must have a CDL, they can't have any felonies that include illegal acts on children, and they can't have any driving felonies, for example DUIs. They also must pass a medical physical, but there is one major flaw in the licensing of school bus drivers in the state of Kansas. If someone has a license in one state, say Nebraska or Missouri, they cannot drive school buses in Kansas without a proper Kansas occupational license. This practice was created by the Kansas Department of Labor and brings up many flaws. My proposal is a bill that allows reciprocity between border states of Kansas to allow for interstate licensing. For example, if someone has a Missouri license and moves to Kansas, they would be allowed to use the same Missouri license to practice bus driving in Kansas. This way, they would not have to go through the same process of training and paying for a license, and the process would be more streamlined. To achieve my goal, I would go through the state legislature of Kansas or the House. This policy would allow border states licensed bus drivers to drive in Kansas without having to go through a similar licensing process again. This would affect bus drivers of border states and Kansas bus drivers. A challenge that might be faced is other border states' legislature deciding to change their policies on issuing school bus licenses. For example, if one state's bus licensing policy was completely different and the training was very different than Kansas's, then there would be an issue with the continuity of the laws in both states. Occupational licensing is a mutual issue between parties, and both parties tend to lead toward the idea that there are many unneeded rules and regulations that stand in the way of a job seeker getting licensed. Shoshana Wiseman stated, and despite widespread agreement on the right and left that licensing requirements are often unnecessary and burdensome, serving mainly to limit job opportunities and impede economic growth, attempts at reform at the national level have been rare, and those reforms that have been proposed have had little impact. This goes to show that national level reforms have been very futile and that acting on a state level would cause for an easier way to get things accomplished. According to The Atlantic, Trump's administration has been making moves toward limiting occupational licensing barriers. Next up, let's talk about the interest groups and public opinions on occupational licensing. The Regulatory Transparency Project is an interest group that lobbies for less licensing restrictions. It's one of the largest interest groups for occupational licensing. The Heritage Foundation, which we'll talk about a little bit more, provides statistics on the amount of licensed jobs and the workers in them to show how many jobs in the U.S. are licensed. Many lower-income households have licensed occupations and unnecessary regulations. My household included, both my parents have licenses to work in the state of Kansas with their jobs. Because school bus licensing is a very specific issue, there is very little data that you can find on the percentage of licenses for school bus drivers. As I talked about a little earlier, the Heritage Foundation has data on regulated licenses that are depicted in this map. As you can see, Kansas is on this map, as well as Nebraska, which is a border state. This map shows overregulated licenses in the United States. Now that we have the basic knowledge on the issue and what we're trying to solve, we can get to the meat of the action. For the Congress members of the state of Kansas who we would need to persuade in order to accomplish our goal, I would provide statistics on the number of bus drivers that are licensed in the state of Kansas and border states. We can provide a real story about the lack of bus drivers and the search for bus drivers in local school districts in Kansas, such as the Lansing district, as many of you may see signs that are posted in search of bus drivers. Members of the Regulatory Transparent Project would likely vouch for the benefits of opening reciprocity along Kansas borders. We could also hold a rally with citizens who occupational licensing regulations affect. The interest groups, in order to gain interest group support, we could easily align with the Regulatory Transparency Project because our values are very similar. Before we can persuade members of Congress to go vote in favor of our bill, we need to reach the public and gain public support. For reaching the public, I propose that we send letters to all of the Kansas and border state licensed bus drivers to spread the word and join our rallies. The population will help us achieve our new House bill by providing personal stories about how the current stringent rules have hurt them. Now that we have all of the information we need in order to make an impact, we can discuss the benefits and costs of our proposal. For the economic benefits, this proposal would save workers money on having to renew Kansas licenses and gain Kansas licenses in the first place. It would also increase interstate commerce by making jobs more accessible between states. The social benefits, specifically this proposal, would help local school districts find bus drivers to transport students easier. Anyone who lives in Kansas or on a border state would have the same opportunities in each state without having to endure repetitive training and pay to get a new license. The international benefits. While this is on a state level, so there aren't very many international benefits, we could be viewed as more streamlined. For morality and justice, the benefit would be making opportunities easier for any member in the society and give people the chance to have some peace of mind when it comes to making sure they are properly equipped for their job. The economic costs, there would be some loss in revenue because people not having to pay for licenses in each state, but this could be overlooked because of the job growth. Social costs, as far as I can tell, there wouldn't be any social harm or backlash except for the people that this may not apply to or they don't understand what we're doing. Once again, the international costs are probably not very applicable because it's on the state level. For morality and justice, the cost doesn't seem to have any major moral infractions. There doesn't seem to be any issues with increasing commerce on a state level.
Surfing on the sound wave, swinging through the stars. Take a left at human testing. Take your second right past Mars on the magic school bus. Navigator nostril.
I'm on the magic school bus.
Make a plankton too.
On our magic school bus.
Drop the river of lava.
On the magic school bus.
Such a fine thing to do. So strap your bones right to the seat. Come on in and don't be shy. Just to make your day complete. You might get baked into a pie on the magic school bus. Step inside, it's a wilder ride.